we had like 3 people on Friday, we had 0 people on Saturday, and then there were some people Sunday afternoon that came from other congregations, but it was pretty sparse. And so we're like, and I was really getting embarrassed. And then Monday, there was a person that had come during the week, and she was a homeschooler, and she let all the homeschoolers know. And then Monday was busy, so you just never know. You just never know. And so we'll go ahead and get started. How many of you seen Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus? It's a documentary, and the guy that did it's named Tim Mahoney. He actually is from the Minneapolis area at one time. If you get a chance to watch it, you might find it interesting. He could edit some of it out to make it a little shorter. But there's a couple things that he was looking into that uh, I'd never heard of the Ipwar Papyrus until I had seen his um, documentary, and so I investigated it further, and it contains a lot more than what he shows in his documentary. So I don't know if we'll get into that tonight, but what we want to do is in his documentary, he tries to straddle the fence, and he's uh, interviewing people that are Bible believers that say, there are evidences that the Israelites were in Egypt. Then he interviews people that say, no, there is no evidence that the Israelites were in Egypt. And so I've taken a lot of courses, some through the University of Pennsylvania. And that's the nice thing about doing things online. You can not have to travel and go. But uh, so I did things through Harvard and University of Arizona, Manchester University in the UK, and several other universities. And one of the things they don't do is give you like a linear timeline, and I'm a linear person, and I don't know. Um, I'm sure there are places that do it, but they'll shoot out dates to you and everything as if you should already be familiar with how everything lays out. So the dating in Egyptology has always been a problem. And the dating does not line up to the other cultures like the Greek and some of these others. Now, when you get to a certain point, it does start getting better. But when they first started looking at the dynasties and these early scientists like Henry Breasted, he was the one that came up, and they put the dynasties in a linear fashion. And they've kind of held on to that up till the 90s and through the 90s. And so there are two chronological timelines. One is called the upper timeline, and the newer one is the lower timeline. And the lower timeline has taken some time off. When they did that, things can start matching up a little bit better. So we want to look at that tonight. I know you can't see this, but trust me, it's just as a reference. So this is Upper Egypt, and this is Lower Egypt. And it's not the way that we look at a map and say, well, we always look at the north as being upper, but it's in terms of elevation. So upper is on the bottom, lower is by the Mediterranean Sea. And we know that this area is the area of Goshen. We're going to talk about a town called Avaris tonight. And then we're going to try to look here at Joseph to Moses tonight, and then pick that up tomorrow night. We know pretty certainly that Solomon's temple began there in 1 Kings around 966 BC. Uh, older sources you'll look at might say 970 BC, and they've kind of like whittled that down to 966. And with that number, we can figure out the Exodus, because in 1 Kings 6:1, it says it was 480 years from the laying of that stone to when they came out of the land of Egypt, across the Red Sea. So we know then that the Exodus takes place if you're using this figure, 1446 BC. Now, as we go through the slides, I might have adjusted that to 1450 just to keep it simple. So around 1450. And in Exodus 12, 40, and 41, it says they were there for 430 years. And it's kind of hard to stretch that out based on a couple of findings. So it could date to the 430 years, might go back to the reference to Abraham's time. But if you look at the descendants of Levi, it's hard to get that chronological dating all the way to the time of Moses. So let's, in using this 430 number, we get 1876 that Joseph would have gone down. And so the original source for Egyptian dates goes back to this individual called Manetho. And Manetho was a Ptolemy Egyptian. Now, what's a Ptolemy Egyptian? When, well, let me just do it this way. Ptolemy was one of Alexander the Great's generals. And when they asked Alexander who was going to inherit the empire, who knows if he said this or not, but they say that he said, fight for it. And so you ended up with that breaking up into four individual sections, three major ones. And Ptolemy was the general that got Egypt. And Ptolemy was very loyal to Alexander. And then Seleucid got the area that will be the Seleucid Empire, which is the Persian area and that upper area. And those are going to be the key ones at that. So this Egyptian was sort of a Greek Egyptian hybrid. Okay. One of the Ptolemies said, give us some history and set the dates. And so he writes around 283 to 446. He writes 3 volumes. And the archaeologists pretty much stuck to his dates based on that. And so he's kind of removed. Now, Josephus, who was the Roman historian, he was actually a Jew. He fought on the Rome. Well, he got captured, and then he went to the Roman side to try to get the Jews to stop rebelling, but they wouldn't, and they hated Josephus. Josephus was eventually adopted by the Flavian dynasty. Vespasian was the first, then Titus, who destroyed Jerusalem, and then Domitian. So he moves to Rome, and he writes the Jewish histories, and he has access to the library in Rome. So he's got access to a lot of information, and he could have gone to Alexandria and checked a lot of dates too. He strongly disagrees with Manetho's king list. You say, Bob, all we want to know were the Israelites in Egypt. And yes, they were. The Bible tells us. So the king list that he made, that's a copy of it there. There's also another source, and this is at Abydos, and Sete the first, and he um, is the grandfather of Ramses the Great, Ramses the Second. Now, people say, well, Ramses, isn't he the Pharaoh of the Exodus? We'll get into this, but he, in the Bible, it talks about Ramses. Ramses is a place. So it's not talking about the Pharaoh. It's talking, and if you look there, it says they left Ramses to Shechem or Sukkah, and so they leave the place and they go to another place. So Ramses the first grew up in Ramses, and he takes the name, the title Ramesses. Okay, so where he was from. So it means raw. We'll get there, and I'll tell you what it means when we get there. So what I want to show you is this king list is made in the 19th dynasty. By the time you get the 19th dynasty, they're trying to restore Egypt because it all falls apart in between. And they hate these certain dynasties from starting with the 18th working backwards. They want to erase it from their Egyptian history. And so Sete starts, and he lists himself and then Ramses the first on the king list. Uh, the 18th dynasty, he doesn't list all of the dynasty there, the kings. Then you get to, it jumps to the 12th dynasty. So they took it out. And there's a reason. That's what we're going to look at tonight. They ripped it out of their history. And they could not stand those dynasties forward. And they're missing a lot of the kings that they found tombs that were in those dynasties. So there was a belief that the dynasties never overlapped. But then as they started looking, and they did overlap. And, when you look at the Israelite kings and the kings of Judah, their reigns overlap somewhat. When Uzziah was stricken with leprosy, Jotham, his son, co-reigned during that time. So there's an overlap of their reigns. And so there are things like that that happen in Egypt as well. So I did this a little bit larger so you see the 18th dynasty here, and we go back, and then there's a 15th dynasty, but it coexists with the 16th and 17th dynasties, which are very weak. And then there's this thing called the Hyksos here. And then there's a 13th dynasty, and then we've got the 12th dynasty. So the Exodus is 1450. So we got, where am I not pointing this in the right direction? You want to advance me a, yeah, we're stuck. Oh, look at that little arrow. Okay, there we go, there we go. So you got Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. We know Joseph comes to Egypt when he is how old? 17 years old. And so we can do the math, and when we do that, so Joseph is sold at 1902, and then he becomes ruler about 1889. Jacob moves around 1880. Now we're using the 430 time stamp that's in Exodus. So Jacob dies at 147. Jacob moves. Oh, by the way, Jacob's 91 years old when Joseph is born. I don't know if you ever think about that, but yeah, that's pretty long time. And I don't know how old Rachel was. so, uh, so then you've got, since we know this, we know that the wilderness years are 40 years. Moses spends 40 years in Midian, and so we know that he's born 80 years this side of the Exodus. So Moses is going to be born around 1530. And so in that time period is where Moses is going to. So everybody kind of with me so far? Any questions? I see some. Sennacherib, the second, is in the 12th dynasty. And he's interesting. During his reign, Egypt becomes grander in terms of trade. We see that people are coming down to Egypt. And what happens during the reign or during Joseph's tenure there? You got 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. What happens to Joseph's family? Well, they have to come down to get food. And during Sennacherib II's reign, there's a lot of things that kind of parallel this. There's a place that's called the Fayoum. It's like an oasis. So the Fayoum, it's like a triangular area. During Sennacherib's reign, there is a canal that's built from the Nile River to this area. And it's like 100 something miles, 110, 120 miles. But it follows the lay of the land. It was fairly easy to construct. Guess what the name of that is, if you look it up? And it's been there as long as anyone can remember. Bar Yusuf, which means Canal of Joseph. And it's called Canal of Joseph today. You can look it up. You can go on Google Maps. You can find it, and you can follow it along. You can see the oasis. This area is built during Sennacherib II's reign. It would make sense if you know that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, that you would find some more growing land. And this area is, a lot of the Romans are buried. They found like 3,000 graves. That Romans loved this area. The Romans called Egypt in this area the breadbasket of the Mediterranean because it was so reliable to grow food. Okay, I'm going to need some help on my clicker. Are we stuck? Oh, that's good. Keep on going. Oh, you start at the beginning? Oh, there we go. Very good. I think it might be the size of my files. The computer's not used to it yet. So let's go ahead and put all of that slide up and I'll show you. Okay, during the reign of Sennacherib II, one of his key Egyptian guys, he's known as a great chief. In his tomb is a painting, and it is the Hyksos, which translates shepherd's kings. Manetho translates it foreign kings, and Josephus gets really upset. He says, no, they're shepherd kings. Josephus says the Hyksos are the Israelites. Well, and when you look at these individuals, and so an artist cleaned it up down here on the bottom, when you look at these people, they're obviously not Egyptians. If you look at their clothing, you look at their beards, and what they're bringing, they bring gifts to Sennacherib. Now, right here is a cartouche, and it gives the name of one of the leaders that is bringing gifts here, and his name is Abisha. And it means, it's a Hebrew name, God is my father. David had a nephew named Abishai, almost the same exact name. So here you see these people with Hebrews names, and archaeologists say, well, these are Canaanites. Well, where did the Israelites come from? Canaan. And they said, well, we found evidence where they lived. Guess where they lived? Arvaris. Guess where Arvaris is? Goshen. They've done some excavations in the last 12 years, and I think they've kind of finished them up and moved on, and we'll look at some of it. But when you look at these, look at this little crook here. It's a shepherd's staff. And that is called a heka, okay, the shepherd's staff. And it means scepter in Egyptian, but not early on. The early on staff is called a was. And the way to remember that, it was the scepter, but not anymore. And you'll see some of their gods carrying this. Okay, hold up there on the going forward. And go back one. Can you go back? There you go. So this, and I found this, and I got a Egyptian hieroglyph dictionary book, and I was looking at it, and I'm looking at scepter, and it says, oh, this was the word for scepter, but look at the heka becomes the word for scepter. And when you look at Tutankhamun, when you look at Ramses, they all have these staffs, right? Guess what the markings are for? The blue and the gold. They are to measure the grain coffers. And the person that wrote the dictionary says, "Oh, and I know what you're thinking. No, this can't have anything to do with Joseph because the dates are all off." And that usually that's the normal answer. So let me ask this question: why then would Egyptians adopt such an item that the Egyptians saw as an abomination? And you might say, well, why did they see shepherds as an abomination? Well, I'm going to show you later on. But there is a reason why. And I just learned it a couple years ago. So these were to, the king would measure the grain coffers and then seal it with his signet ring. And with the staff, he could tell that there was no rocks in the bottom, that it was measured properly and everything. And then he would seal it. What did Joseph get on his finger? Pharaoh's ring, right? Well, that's what you seal. You seal the grain with. So very interesting. And another thing to remember is when there were dynasties that were in Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, and when they came together and unified, the Pharaoh that became over the whole land combined the crown of the Upper Egypt into his own crown. And then the capital was moved to Thebes. But the crown comes together. And so when they would defeat peoples, they sometimes would take the emblems of the defeated people and merge it into their royal garb. Everybody with me so far? Just give me a nod that you're awake. Okay. The Egyptians, Joseph says, hey, we're an abomination. Even Joseph's servants would not eat with him. Remember that? They would not even eat with him because they were seen as an abomination. Shepherds were an abomination to the Egyptians. And there's a reason for that. Okay. Now, this is Sennacherib II there. Now, up at Avaris, there is a thing called the Medane Project, and you can go on their website. They were given permission to go and excavate around the area of Avaris. And Egypt, you get more artifacts out of Egypt because, and for the most part, it's arid, it's dry. That's why their mummies last so long. But when you get up into this area where the Nile splits and you've got more marshy land, things don't fare as well. Wooden objects rot where they don't rot like they do in the other parts. They found this, and they say it's a very Canaanite looking image. Somebody had tore the face of it, broke the face off of it, and it seems to have a shepherd staff over the shoulder, and there is a cloak. And this is one of their findings. Now, one of the rules that they did, they could go excavate this area, but then they had to put it all back. So I don't know if they kept any of this out to put on display in museums or not, but they had to cover it back up. Need to go back one. Okay. So what they found are the remnants. And it didn't look like this, they're looking at foundations because it was destroyed. And there is one tomb that looks like a pyramid there, and that statue was in that tomb. And then there are 11 more tombs off to the side here. There are no bones. They found no graves. They found no bones here. What did Joseph ask them to do when they went back to the promised land? To take his bones. If Joseph asked his bones to be taken back, don't you suppose all the other brothers would have asked the same question, or they would have done the same for them? I don't think they had any bones left in the wilderness of Sinai. If they're taking Joseph's bones, and he made a point to ask that, they're not going to leave any trace of bones because they're going to take them all back. And it's kind of interesting because when you get to the first century, you have those ossuaries that we find that they used. and they would put their whole families into these ossuaries. It's important for them, the bones be all together. Remember Abraham? He's had bought the cave from Ephraim. So inside, give me an advance here. Thank you. And so there, inside that pyramid one, there is an image, and they know that this individual had reddish hair. And they had this long thing because they can do that. They have that scan, and they can see what it was painted and the hues and everything. And so they were able to reconstruct what they think that this was. And so here, looking under the scan where it gives you the original pigments that they can still see with the computer, you see that this is not an Egyptian. And they said, well, we did find Canaanite gods here. I'm not all surprised, because I think the Hyksos are the Israelites. When Jacob brings the family down, what does he tell them to put away? All their foreign gods. When Jacob comes back from Laban, who has her father's idols under her camel? Rachel, right? Let me just ask you this. We see the Brady bunch, but here you've got Jacob's bunch. Were they model citizens? No. They had some skeletons in the closet, right, with deeds that they had done in the land of Canaan. During Sennacherib's reign, he moves the capital from down here up to Itchaway, I can't say it, and it's right there by Fayum. And see, you can see it. This is Google Maps, and look at that. You can see that area there, and that is just amazing. So he moves it from Thebes up there, and the Avaris is where the Hyksos are at. You got Fayum there, and this area under Sennacherib II. Farming is developed for irrigated farming. How did they irrigate before? They let the Nile River overflow once, twice a year, and it irrigated for them. They didn't have to do anything, but they needed more farmland. And so this was created, and it gave them a lot more. And this comes from the Nile, and it supplies this Fayum, and it's very fertile area. I was wrong. It's 230 miles long. And it is named Bar Yusuf to this day. It's also called the Canal of Joseph, also Grand Canal is another name that people have called it. But it always refers back. Just type in Bar Yusuf into Google, or type it into Canal of Joseph, and you can just follow it along. And you go on Google Maps, and you can just follow it along there, and it comes out, and it irrigates this whole area, and it made a lake, and the lake is there today. And this gives you the different elevations. It's too difficult to see here, but it's a marvel of engineering, and it gets very little notice. During the 13th dynasty, and notice the Hyksos are here, but the Hyksos, they appeared in that tomb at that time. And then they become a dynasty, the Hyksos at Arar. And during the 13th dynasty, there is a list, and it's called the Brooklyn Papyrus because it's in the Brooklyn Museum in New York. They found it in the 1950s, and everybody was really excited because there was a woman, and the dates are right there, 1809 to 1743. There we go. And so this Theban noblewoman, and that's her name, she is making a household list of 95 servants. 45 of them have Hebrew names. So one of the names of the Hebrew midwives is on the list. I'm not saying that she was that woman's slave. What I'm saying is a person that had that name as well. How many people in here know someone named Bob besides me? Right? There's a lot of Bobs, right? Or Roberts, or and so a lot of people. There's my daughter's named Aaron, and someone else has a son or in here named Aaron, right? So anyway, so it has all of these. Oops, okay, okay. So that was discovered, and they got really excited about this because they're saying this helps confirm the account of the Israelites being in Egypt. Now there arises a Pharaoh, and during these times, the Hyksos they grow, and the Avaris becomes a walled city or a fortified city, and there are conflicts with the 15th dynasty, or the not the 15th, but the 16th, 17th dynasties. But the Avaris population has begun to explode, and they know they're Canaanites. They say they have Canaanite customs. Okay, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob dwelt among the Canaanites, and their children picked up a lot of Canaanite customs. You have in the into the 17th dynasty, this Pharaoh decides, I'm going to defeat and get the Avaris settlement out of here. And he goes and fights the Hyksos, and he is killed in battle. And that's his mummy. And look at his skull. And I know there's some kids in here. Sorry about that. So he is, and it says in his tomb, he's killed by the Hyksos. Now, his son creates the 18th dynasty and becomes Moses. Okay, and that's almost the first, and that's on his tomb, him slaying a Hyksos. Amos or Moses means born. Amos means, or it's a shortened version of La Moses. That means born of the moon. That was one of their gods. And so he is the first of the 18th dynasty. And then there are four Tutmosis, which means Tut is the god of wisdom, okay, born of wisdom. Moses is not a Hebrew name, it's an Egyptian name. And it would make sense if Pharaoh's daughter found a child, she would name it under the dynasty, wouldn't it? But in the Bible it says meaning to draw out of the water. She found him, she drew him out. Well, that's kind of a birthing process. And remember, they used birthing stools in the day. They set upright. They draw out. So she drew him out of the water, and she names him Moses, which is part of the dynasty. So it makes perfect sense. And he would have been born probably in Amosis. And of course, Amos defeats and subdues, during that time, defeats and subdues the Hyksos. And so, because they killed his dad, and so he is able to defeat and puts them under a very heavy time of persecution. Okay? Okay. So the dates are working now. Since they've gone to that lower chronology, the dates are working. Moses is born most likely during the reign of Moses. I have a friend that has spent his life trying to figure out the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And he always thought that Tutmosis III events in his reign sounded like some events that happened in that. So he on his own came up that he wasn't looking at the dates, he was looking at the pharaohs, and he thinks Tutmosis the third is the pharaoh of the Exodus, and it kind of lines up here. So his birth, so when he leaves, and Tutmosis is here, he's at the Exodus. So you got 1, 2, and 3 Tutmosis. So Moses is away for 40 years. So we don't know the Egyptian that Moses killed, but whatever it was, he was afraid, and he fled, was gone for those 40 years, and he doesn't come back until the end of the 40 years. Aaron is older than Moses, so he's 4 years older than Moses, and he is gone. The Exodus is going to be 446 to 1450. Oh, am I pointing this in the wrong direction? I can't talk and think at the same time. We're doing good here. Now, I want to, let's back up here. Can we go back? I think I got ahead of myself. Go back more. There we go. Let's stop here. We want to talk about the Ipwer papyrus. Ipwer was a scribe, and he writes this papyrus. The copy they have is a copy of the original, they believe. The name Ipwer, this is how they date it, okay? This is how they come up with the date of what. It ranges in a 400-year span. It dates between 1450, sound familiar, Exodus, to 1850, okay? That's when the name Ipwer is used. So that's why they give it that date. Now, Ipwer writes this document, and he's talking about all the events that are happening in Egypt and all these bad things that are happening, which for a scribe working for a pharaoh, that is treason. They never wrote about bad events ever, the ancient kings. And so somebody in his administration that's doing that would be like a Benedict Arnold. And so the name ceases to be used after the 1450 date. How many people in here would name their child Benedict? Right? So it makes sense that, and let's read some of this. Everybody with me so far? You having fun? Okay. So this is what it looks like. And let's stop right here. And this is the Ipwer papyrus on the left side. The plague is throughout the land, blood is everywhere. The river is blood, men shrink from tasting human beings and thirst after water. That's our water, this is our happiness, what shall we do? All is ruined. If you look on Wikipedia and you look at the Ipwer papyrus, this is the only thing that they pop up and make a comment on, okay, as if this was the only thing he had to say. And they said, well, some Christians think that this could be one of the plagues of the Exodus. And so they explain it that, well, the water, got a little churned, and the clay in Egypt is really red, and so it just looked really bloody. It doesn't sound like that to me. And if that was the only thing, you could discount it. But when you look at more of these, now the Ipwer papyrus is at the Royal Dutch Museum in the Netherlands, and Tim Mahoney in his documentary went up there, and I'd never heard of the papyrus, and he went up there and he's asking the curator, well, these sound like the plagues. And he says, yeah, they certainly do. And he says, well, do you think this could be talking about the plagues? He says, the dates are off. Not on my calculation now. Now, let's look at some more here. So on the right side, you have the biblical account in Exodus, and that seems to parallel pretty well. So we're going to move up. Whoop. Yeah. All the gates and columns are consumed by fire. Okay, hold that thought. Lower Egypt weeps. The entire palace is without its revenues. To it belong the wheat and the barley, the geese and the fish. Grain is perished on every side. They like to use that word forsooth. You might, whenever you get discouraged, you might just say forsooth. and that way you sound like an Egyptian. So, but that would not do what James says, let your answer be yea or nay. So, forsooth, that has perished which was yesterday seen. The land is left over to its weariness. Now, let's look over here in Exodus 9. And the fire ran along the ground, and there was hail, and fire mingled with the hail, and was very grievous. What's over here? The gates and columns and walls are consumed by fire. Hail smote every herb of the field. He's complaining about all of it's gone. It was there the day before. And so there remained no green thing in the trees, herbs, or the field throughout all the land of Egypt. All animals, their hearts weep, cattle moan. Behold, cattle are left astray, there's none to gather them. The hand of the Lord is upon the cattle and which is in the field, and there would be very grievous sickness. Gather thy cattle, and he that did not fear the word of the Lord left his servants and the cattle in the field. And they died. The land is without light. When have you ever in your lifetime made that statement? Where are you at? Hey, I'm up here in Iowa and there's been no light. They say, well, you're crazy, right? But he writes that down. The land is without light. There was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt. How long? Until Pharaoh called for Moses to come and ask God to remove it. The children of the princes are dashed against the walls. The children of the princes are cast out in the street. The prison is ruined. He who places his brother on the ground is everywhere. It's groaning throughout the land, mingled with lamentation. The death of the firstborn. In my family, I have a picture of my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my dad, and myself. We are all the first of our generation. I just think that's a neat picture. So we're all the first of our generation. And we all lived we're alive at the same time. If that plague had came, the way I understand it, it wasn't the death of the infants, it was the death of the firstborn. And so all four of us would have died during that plague because we were the firstborn. So you have every family is going to be affected that has a firstborn person still alive. There was not a house where there was not one dead. There was a great cry in Egypt. Look at the comparisons here. Fire has mounted up on high. Its burning goes forth against the enemies of the land. If I ask you, is Egypt very mountainous or very flat overall along the Nile? It's very flat, right? There are some hills, the Valley of the Kings and everything, but it's pretty flat overall. You have the pillar of cloud that led them by the way at night, and the pillar of fire to give them light to go by night. When Pharaoh brings the army after them, and they're camped at the Red Sea, what stands between Pharaoh's army? The pillar of fire faces Pharaoh's army, and the Israelites are on the other side of the cloud. And this guy writes it down. Fire is mounted up on high. Now, if you're not convinced, gold, lapis, lazuli, silver, malachite, all these precious stones, bronze, are fastened on the necks of female slaves. Now, who just goes and does that? Look at what the account says over here. They borrowed of the Egyptians silver, jewels, gold, raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. They lent to them such things as they required. What are these things going to end up being used for out in the wilderness? The big majority of it's going to be used in making the tabernacle and the things that go in the tabernacle. I mean, I don't see how, to me, it can get much more clear. Even if he wrote the biblical account verbatim and the word papyrus, it couldn't be much more close in my eyes. So uh, this has to be something that has to be in the discussion, right? We're the Israelite. It just matches up too finely. We're going to look at the Armana period, and we're going to start that tonight. No, we're not. We're going to start that tomorrow night. Everyone's faces are just kind of like the Armana period, okay? The Armana period, when we go through it, it's going to sound like the conquest of Canaan. In the end of the 18th dynasty, everything in Egypt has collapsed. And who has heard the name Pharaoh Akhenaten? He goes to a one God worship. They don't know why, but he goes to a one God worship of a God that was not in the Egyptian records prior to. His wife is Nefertiti, his queen. You've heard of her, right? His son is Tutankhamun. You know, when they found Tutankhamun, they didn't know who he was because the 19th dynasty did such a good job erasing them out of the history books. So we'll talk about that tomorrow night. So if you're recording right now, if you want to